In this lesson, we're going to consider some of the basic facts about income distribution, focusing mainly on the United States, and show you some good ways to describe how the income distribution changes over time. By income distribution, we mean the percent of income that's earned by different quintiles in the economy. A quintile is defined as those in the different sections of the income distribution, lower 20%, the second 20%, up to the top 20%. So you basically divide the economy into these percentages based on the amount of income the family, or in this case, the household, earns. Next to it, we show the percent of income in total that's earned by each of these quintiles. The percent of income is computed simply by adding up all of the income in the entire economy, that's for all of these quintiles, and considering the amount of income earned in each of the quintiles and dividing one into the other. So for example, 5% is the percent of income earned by the lower 20% of households. So add up all the amount of income earned by that lower 20%, divided by all the income earned by all the people in the economy, and you get 5%. And as you can see, as you consider the second highest 20%, the number is at 11%, then it goes 17, 24, and the top 20% earn 43% of the income in the United States. So that's a distribution. And you could say the distribution is less equal if the top get more than if the bottom. In this case, suppose the top got 48 rather than 43, and you took that extra 5% out of the lower 20 and second 20%, then it would become less equal. So we're interested in income distribution for a number of reasons. One is we want to make sure that there's a safety net in the economy, that people at the very bottom are doing okay with unfortunate circumstances. And in addition, you want to make sure that the society has a sense of equal opportunity for people so that they have the chance to advance and don't get stuck in especially the lowest part of the income distribution. So there's many reasons to be concerned about income distribution in an economy. One thing you have to be careful of when you interpret a table like this, and this is pretty representative of the United States, is that people move from one quintile to the other. This is like a snapshot in the picture. It's a snapshot, and I'm still focusing on the column percent of income, come to cumulative percent in a minute. But it's a snapshot of what's happening in a particular year, a particular point in time. But if you consider different points in time, changes over decades or even years or longer periods than that, the people who are in the lower quintile are no longer in the lower quintile. At least a lot of them have moved to the second or third quintile. It may be that when you took the snapshot, the lower quintile consisted of younger people just beginning, but then they grow older and their salaries go up, so they may move to the second or the third quintile, or they become lucky, or they get education and so they move up. And you also can see people at the top. They may get complacent, they may lose their way, they may experience some bad luck, and so they may move down. So people are always moving back and forth amongst these quintiles, and we have a little data on that. It turns out about 60% of households move from one quintile to another over a decade. And about half of those in the bottom quintile move out of the bottom. And about half of those in the top quintile move out of the top quintile. We don't know where they go. They might go to the bottom, they might go to the fourth, whatever. But that's a considerable amount of mobility across the income distribution. There are some concerns that this mobility across the income distribution is getting smaller in the United States, but whether it's getting smaller or larger, you have to recognize that when you look at a table like this, it's a snapshot. Things change over time as people move. We also want to see how you can represent the change in this income distribution over time. How does this snapshot change when you take snapshots at different years? Or how does it compare in different countries? How is the income distribution in Europe versus the United States versus Latin America? To do that, we need to have some sort of simpler measures to look at rather than a table. And so economists and others have derived methods to do that. A lot of it is based on the third column here called cumulative percent distribution. It simply just adds up the percent of income in each of the quintiles. So for example, the cumulative percent for the second 20% is 16. That's the sum of 11 and 5. And if you go include all of it, the cumulative percent for at the top 20% is 100, because the numbers in the second column, percent of income, if we've done our calculations right, should add up to 100. And so the cumulative percent is the way that we can easily examine the income distribution changes over time. And we do that by plotting the numbers in the third column. And the plots are shown in this next picture. It's called a Lorenz curve, actually. And on the horizontal axis, we're just plotting the cumulative percent of households, up to 100% of households. And on the vertical axis, we're plotting the cumulative percent of income. So these are just the numbers from that table. The plots there, the dots, the labeled A, B, etc., are just the numbers from the table. So for example, if you look at the number for the second quintile, 20%, it's 16. So you go over here at the 40 and you see point B is 16. So that's the cumulative percent of households at 40. That's the second quintile plus the first quintile, and we know that's 16. And the A is shown there at the 20, and that was 5%, and so on. And those are just plotted. And you can see some curvature to this picture as plotted. Now, this plot is shown, it's overlaid in a diagram that represents two extremes of income inequality. The extreme represented by the 45-degree line, this line here, this 45-degree line, which goes from 0 to 100 on both axes, is a line of perfect income equality. Everybody gets the same issue. 20% gets 20%, 40% gets 40%, 80% gets 80%, etc. That's perfect equality. At the other extreme is where it's perfectly unequal. In this case, if you went along this line, 60% would get nothing, 80% would get nothing, 100% would get 100% up there at the top. And so that's completely unequal. So the actual distribution is between those two, and it gives you a way to kind of measure the degree of inequality. In particular, there's something called the Gini coefficient, which is just representing the area in the blue line right there. That area, if you take that and divide it by the area on the total triangle, you get the Gini coefficient. So again, the blue line, the blue area, I should say, divided by the total area in this triangle is the Gini coefficient. And the larger, therefore, the Gini coefficient is, the more unequal the income distribution. So we have the Lorenz curve, from which we compute the Gini coefficient immediately. With the Gini coefficient or the Lorenz curve, you can begin to see the impact of, say, taxes on the income distribution in the United States or any other country. So this is a picture of what happens to the Lorenz curve due to taxes. And you can see taxes tend to make the distribution somewhat less unequal. It moves the Lorenz curve closer to the line of perfect equality. The line which is in black is the market income. That's what you get before you pay your taxes, the market income from wages and salaries, interest, and dividends. And since you pay tax on those, and since the tax is higher the more you earn in a progressive tax system, as we have in the United States, it tends to reduce the inequality. And that's the extent to which it reduces it at this particular example. You also can use the Gini coefficient to look at the differences in income distribution in different countries around the world. So in this case, the greenish colors are more equal than the purplish or bluish colors. The United States is, you can see from the picture, kind of in the middle. It's not as equal as Canada, and Scandinavia has even a more equal income distribution. On the other hand, it's less unequal than Mexico or much of Latin America or much of Africa as well. And so you see there's quite a bit of difference in income inequality around the world as represented by this Gini coefficient. It's also important to note is when you think about the world as a whole, there's quite a bit less equality than you get in any individual country. You could imagine getting a Gini coefficient for the entire world. In that case, you'd be mixing in the very poor people in Africa, Central Africa, Latin America, with the wealthier people in Scandinavia or Europe, the rest of Europe or the United States. And that, of course, is quite a bit of difference in income. So the Gini coefficient for the world shows a lot more inequality than for the individual countries. And this map helps you understand that. Finally, there has been a change in income distribution over time in the United States. We've been able to examine some of the aspects of that earlier in the course. But one question is how much of that is due to the taxes and the transfers that we've been examining recently in these lessons. The Gini coefficient helps you understand that. So this is a picture of the Gini coefficient from the 70s, 80s, up until the 2000s. And you can see there's two bars. One bar is the Gini coefficient before people have been taxed and before transfer payments are given to lower income individuals or others. And you can see in the red how after taxes and transfers there's more equality, the Gini coefficient is lower. But in both of these cases, the Gini coefficient is increasing. It's increasing before taxes and transfers, it's increasing almost by the same amount after taxes and transfers. So this increase in inequality is most likely due to other factors than changes in taxes and transfers. And one really important question in economics is why. So let's sort of just conclude what we've been thinking about here. We've seen that the income distribution has become more unequal since the 1970s. To understand that more, you should really be looking beyond the Gini coefficient or the Lorenz curves, because you know there's mobility within the different income groups. This would be less of a problem if there was plenty of mobility, so the poor could become middle income or upper income, and that's an important question to understand. But we also can see that it's really the market income that has become more equal, the income before taxes and changes. The changes in tax and transfer programs are not a large factor in this as far as we can tell. What are the reasons? Well, economics can tell you a lot of the reasons that economists have been studying carefully. One is that the returns to education and skills are increasing, that the economy is becoming more technological. There's more global competition, so the returns to going to school and getting skills are increasing. And that will really make the distribution wider, because those going to school and getting the education will get higher incomes with those higher skills than those who are not. It pulls apart the difference between those with an education and those without. In addition, it seems like there's some evidence that the quality of education is slipping, especially amongst disadvantaged groups or poor groups in certain parts of the country, and that also pulls the distribution apart, spreads it, as is shown in these pictures. So by looking at the measures of income distribution, thinking about it with how much each quintile gets, representing that with Lorenz curves, representing that with Gini coefficients, seeing what happens over time with and without taxes and transfers, you get an understanding of what is actually going on with income distribution and what indeed the role of government should be in dealing with this issue. Thank you.